Welcome to Wildlife Rehabilitation from Rescue to Release, a podcast dedicated to licensed wildlife rehabilitators and the veterinarians who support them. I'm your host, Gail Buell. Techniques we discuss here are meant for licensed wildlife professionals. If you aren't licensed and trained for wildlife rehabilitation, do not attempt to rehabilitate any wild animal. If you do find an injured wild animal, a wildlife professional can recommend next steps. We'll tackle topics about rescue, care, management, reconditioning, and releasing wildlife found in North America. This is a deep dive into each subject. We hope to give rehabilitators information they can use because they're already going to great lengths to rescue and nurse animals back to health. There are three possible outcomes in wildlife rehabilitation: release, euthanasia, and placement. An injured or orphaned wild animal's journey to restored health and independence is delicate and complex. We draw techniques and expertise from many disciplines. Many animals brought into rehabilitation cannot be saved. The last gift we can give them is humane euthanasia. We will talk more about when this is necessary. Sometimes animals are deemed non-releasable and evaluated to be suitable for a life in captivity. When that happens, we shift to a long-term approach to managing their care, training, and housing. These animals serve as ambassador animals, a term for the animals that rehabilitators use to educate the public. Each episode, we'll speak with experts who represent specialty topics across the profession of wildlife rehabilitation and ambassador animal care and management, showcasing best practices. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. I am so excited about this podcast and this series of podcasts. We are going to be talking about Timberdoodles. If you don't know what those are, you will. But at first, I want to introduce Tim Jasinski. He's the Wildlife Rehabilitation Specialist at Lake Erie Nature and Science Center, which is in Bay Village, Ohio. Welcome, Tim.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
This is so great. I do, before we get into kind of your origin story on how you landed where you landed and how you got involved in wildlife rehabilitation, I just want to maybe just briefly talk about how you and I met. Is that one of the facilities that I mentor and work with a lot got in some young Timberdoodle. Again, we'll talk about what they are in a few minutes here. And we're having a lot of difficulty raising them. And we decided that after that season, we were going to work really hard on a standard operating procedure for Timberdoodles. And so we started looking around for people who really knew how to handle these animals. And we found you. And you have been just an absolutely amazing resource and very generous with your time. And we have come up with a standard operating procedure that everyone is going to have access to. We're putting some final touches on it, but it will be on our resource page. So, Tim, why don't you give yourself a little introduction for everybody on how you got into rehabilitation and how you landed at Lake Erie Nature and Science Center?
So yeah, it's a long, quick, I can make this, it's a long story, but I can make it quick. I've been involved with wildlife rehabilitation since I was little. I remember finding sick pigeons or cardinals when I was a kid, probably 7 or 8 years old, maybe, and I would take care of them. And, that was in the 80s. So, there were no permits and stuff back then that I knew about. So, and I just got into it, and I just always loved animals. I've always had tons of animals my whole life. I raised cage birds since I was probably around 13. I started breeding parakeets and Goldien finches and all kinds of other stuff, doves, ringneck doves and diamond doves. And I've always loved water, just wildlife in general, all animals. And so I met, I don't even know. So one of my long-term friends was getting into rehabilitation, and she would always call me when geese need to be captured because I'm quick with it. So he would call me and say, this goose needs captured, this goose needs, whatever. So I'd run out and catch it. And I remember the one time specifically, we went out and I caught the bird before she was even out of the car. and then the word got out that I was quick and can capture things. And then I started to work with the Medina Raptor Center in Ohio here. They're a great wildlife rehab center. They specialize in raptors and songbirds. And, I would do captures for them and transfer that to them. And then I just kind of started networking with people. And then oddly, so I used to do wildlife photography. I kind of got out of it because I don't like carrying all the gear that I have to carry, like my scope and my bins and then the cameras and stuff. So I gave up the camera for my bins and my scope to look for waterfowl and other birds and stuff. And I used to do photography. And so I was working at a pet shop at the time. That was my first job. And a lady had an owl shirt on. I'm like, hey, I like your shirt. And she's like, oh, thanks. And she said she volunteered at the center that I work, Lake Your Nature and Science. So I showed her my photo. She's like, oh, you need to go volunteer there. I'm like, okay. So, I never ended up going. And then I was birding at a local nature center, Rocky River Nature Center, and a hairy woodpecker hit the window. And so I'm like, oh, crap. So I went out and caught it. And I asked where to take it to, and then told me to take it to Lake Erie. I'm like, oh, that place came up twice. So I took the bird up there, and I went in the intake room with the woman, and I'm like, how do I get a job doing this? And she's like, well, you have to have college and all this stuff. I'm like, oh, okay, I don't have college. Like, all right. And then when I met that woman in the pet store, she said, go volunteer. So I went up there and asked about it, and I started volunteering, and that was in 2008. And then I just went from there, and I started volunteering. Then so in 2010, I quit my pet shop job, and I was a manager at that time, and I quit there. And I started, I took a chance at an internship. It was actually a seasonal position back then. And I got that, but then I didn't get hired because, whatever.
Sure.
And then I got the internship again the next summer, but only part-time. And so I was kind of working a couple different jobs. I worked at the Cleveland Museum of Natural History. I worked at the Cleveland Aquarium. And so I was doing all kinds of other things. And then in 2013, kind of management switched around there. And my former boss, Amy, hired me part-time. And then that's where I got in finally. And then I got full-time in 2014, technically.
Sure. Wow.
So yeah, that was the quick story.
Quick, but it has some familiar themes though, because a lot of people get involved in rehabilitation in a very similar way, right? That they find an animal that was injured and they need to, like, can I bring it someplace? Can I take care of it? Oh, I can do this,
right?
Or through volunteering or things like that. So, for me, it was I wanted to be a veterinarian and I needed experience working with a vet, and I happened to be at the University of Minnesota campus, and the Raptor Center is part of the College of Veterinary Medicine. So I started volunteering. So that's how one of the ways I got in. But yeah, you have a very familiar story. But it's kind of a crooked path at the same time because, but I would venture that the position at the pet store, but also you said the Museum of Natural History.
Yep.
What was the other place that you said?
The Cleveland Aquarium.
The Cleveland Aquarium. I mean, both of those, even though maybe you realize this. I've always realized no matter what job I've had, I've always learned something from that I can take to the jobs that I have in the future. And when you said those two, I'm like, I bet that gave you some good background experience too.
It did. I think one of the things I always talk about when people ask, what's the hardest part of your job? And then I say, it's usually talking to the public sometimes because they can be really tricky and rough to talk to. And so dealing with when I worked at the pet shop, you have to deal with angry customers. They didn't get whatever they wanted or something. And oftentimes people come to us with a question that they have an answer for, that they want that answer. And rehabilitators don't give that answer. You know what I mean? They don't.
That's right.
You can't take that fawn home and take care of it. No, put it back where you got it. And so you have to be very good at working with people as well. And so all the years I was there for 15 years, it was my first job. And so all those years working at the pet shop really helped me be able to learn how to work and talk with people and do it in a professional way, where sometimes it can be very frustrating and you have to keep your, keep your sanity and,
Well, yeah. And it's keeping the eyes on the prize, right? Which is, in rehabilitation, it's like, it's the welfare of that animal, but it's also, we want to make sure that these people have an understanding in a way that they're not angry or anything, because the community is part of rehabilitation, right? There are
Yes.
eyes and ears. They certainly donate. They certainly support. All of those kinds of things. And so, and a lot of people, who get into rehab, it's like, well, I want to work with animals. I don't want to work with people.
Right.
Well, that's all fine and good. However, most of it is people.
It is.
And
Yep.
it is. And having those skills are invaluable. And the fact that you learn them because of a job you had, you came ready into this position.
Right. Right.
To work with the public.
It is. And then that's also one of the main other parts of our jobs is education. Like we talk to these people that are, they have an answer that they already want to get. We don't give it to them, but then we have to, teach them how to, or why we're, saying this answer, why we're doing this. It's not that we don't want you to care for it. It's just you don't have the right resources or the right understanding of, what you're doing. And most of the time it's benign on the people's part. They're trying to help. They just don't know they're doing the wrong thing, So
Exactly.
That's where you have to be, really figure out each situation is different, of course, but just talking to the people and saying, well, hey, this is why we're telling you this. And just to be really upfront and honest, but also very, compassionate as well.
Yeah, I think that is an excellent thought and an excellent way to look at it. Compassionate, because these people do want to help. Otherwise, they wouldn't be calling you or they wouldn't be bringing the animal to you. Right. They want to help. They want to do the right thing.
Right.
And you just have to sometimes steer them in the direction that the animal needs.
Yep. Definitely.
So yes, it's a delicate thing, and sometimes it's frustrating. But if you keep your eyes on that goal, it then that helps you get through that, and then you can laugh about it afterwards.
Yes, definitely.
Oh, phew, we got it. So now you're at Lake Erie Nature and Science Center, and you're in Ohio, and you're on the migratory pathway of the Timberdoodle. And so I thought maybe what we would do is talk a little bit about natural history of this bird. And of course, Timberdoodle is one of the many nicknames this bird has, and it is a bird, but I'm going to let Tim reveal what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, so the other name I like that a buddy of mine called them is bog stompers. I really like that name because I'm like, you know what, they are doing that. It's a really cool name. So Timberdoodle's nice, but I think bog stomper is my favorite because that really kind of shows more about this species. But it's the American woodcock. It's a little shorebird that's really not on the shore. For the most part, they're a very amazing species, and they're just, I love everything about them. They're the first calls we get every spring, the people call and they say that basically they have an alien that they found downtown. I'm like, I know exactly what you're talking about. So
we'll talk about what they look like in a minute. Oh my gosh, I love it. I've got an alien. Anyway.
Yep.
Okay, so let's talk about American woodcock. So we know that they kind of look like aliens, or what some people think are aliens, and they find them downtown. So maybe let's talk more natural history. So, shorebird, not on the shore. So where are they supposed to be? Not downtown.
Yeah, so typically they like to be in wet woodlands, like edgy wet woodlands. So you have a swamp, and there'll be like a thicket that kind of goes up into some woods, and they like that thick part there. They like the kind of like catbirdy, kind of is a way to say it. That where catbirds like to hang out, like where it's kind of low, thicker brush, and that's kind of what they like to hang out in, where it's moist because they're they probe for their food, so that's got to be moist, and so that's what the kind of habitat they're looking for.
And so when they are, before we talk about how they're probing for their food, maybe let's describe what they look like.
Sure. So they look like a football with chopsticks coming out of the front top of it. They're a real chunky, real well camouflaged, cryptic looking bird with a long bill that's actually it's pliable at the end, and they have big, huge eyes on the side of their head, and they're just, they're so cool and they blend right in. I remember years ago when I was telling you I did photography, I kicked up a woodcock, and so I saw where it landed. So I walked over to it. I want to get a photo of it, and I could not find it. And I'm like, I know it's here. And I'm looking around, and I took one more step, and it flew up right in my face and scared the heck out of me. And then I didn't get the photo.
Wow. But you've never forgotten that story.
No, their camouflage is incredible. And so they're just a really amazing little shorebird they're so cool looking. And most people don't really know what they are. When we get calls, like I said, people think they're aliens from outer space, and I can describe exactly what they're seeing. And they think I'm psychic for knowing what it is,
Right,
and so
right.
They're just an amazing bird. So, that long bill, the big eyes, shorter kind of stockier legs. They don't have the typical shorebird legs that you see on a yellow legs or a killdeer. They're shorter. And they're such cool birds.
So they're probing with their bill into the moist soil. And what kinds of things do they eat?
So you eat mostly invertebrates. They'll eat salamanders, I've read, but primarily they're eating earthworms and other kind of invertebrates like that. So their bill is actually real soft and pliable. So when they go down to the soil, they can actually open the tip of their bill. The upper mandible kind of opens and kind of curves up, and they can kind of dig in the soil as they're going down. And when you watch them feed, they'll kind of do their little woodcock walk, like you've seen the walk like an Egyptian
right.
on YouTube with them walking. They have this little walk that they do, and then they'll probe in the mud, and they'll put they'll bill down, and then they'll hold it for a second to feel if there's any movement. And then they'll take it back out, and they'll put it back down, and then they'll wait again. It's really cool to watch them feed. So it's just I'll probably say 150 times throughout this podcast, American woodcock are just amazing birds.
I've been falling in love with them too, right along with you. They're pretty amazing. So the little Egyptian walk that they do, do we know why they do that? Is it display to other woodcock, or is it to try to make noise so earthworm move, or?
So there's probably a couple different thought processes on it. It could be, many different things. It could be that, they're maybe trying to get the worms to move, or they kind of, rock back and forth, kind of like a lot of shorebirds do, where they're kind of blending in with the water level of the edge of the water, kind of moving up and down the shore.
Uh-huh.
So I don't know. It could be that too. It's hard to say, but it's adorable either way.
If you can spot them, right?
Right.
So you see them in the spring, and so I am going to venture. Well, actually, I kind of know a little bit about this. Is that they do migrate? Yeah, and so I know they're found on the eastern side of the United States or North America. Mm-hmm. Are they found in Canada?
So they do. So I'll talk a little bit more later when we're talking about release and stuff. But we have a lot of our collision birds we can watch where they're going with they have a little MODIS tag on them, and you can see them kind of go up over the lake and up through and into Canada. So it's great habitat up there for them.
Yeah, in a lot of places, I would imagine. But on the eastern side, and Minnesota has American woodcock too. And I was recently reading that Minnesota, and it has to do with all the wetlands, right?
Yeah.
We've got close to 10% of the population, but that American woodcock populations are actually dropping.
Yep.
And I'm sure there's a variety of reasons, one of which we're going to talk about, which is cities.
Yeah.
American woodcock, if they're breeding, in Canada and, places like where you are and here in Minnesota, where do they go in the wintertime or in the fall?
They're not long distance migrants like some of the warblers are. I would say they're probably short distance migrants. They'll go to Tennessee, Louisiana, Texas, the southern states and kind of winter there. They don't go across the Gulf or anything like that. Okay. They just kind of do the southern states. From what I know, from what the data I've seen, is they do that. So that's where they go.
And I have not read this, and you may not know this either, but I'm assuming that they're looking for the same kind of habitat down there.
Yeah, they would be. Yeah, because that's how they feed. So it wouldn't be like a warbler that, totally switches their habitat needs, because they have to feed a certain way. So these guys would still be wanting to be in wet swamps and, field edges that are moist.
Okay. So when they're migrating, they're partial migrating from the southern part of the United States to where you guys are in Ohio. when do you first start hearing or seeing about them or that kind of thing? And then I want to talk about their courtship because their
Okay,
courtship is
sure.
spectacular.
So what we've learned is that, especially with lights out, and we'll talk about later, but it seems like the after second year males, the males that were hatched the year. So if it was after second year, so they would be hatched in, say, 2020, they'll arrive first because they want to get to the breeding territories to claim their territory. And I think what we're learning is that they breed along the way. So sometimes, when you get to the biggest week in American birding in Ohio, you'll see woodcock chicks that are almost full grown in the beginning of May. So that means that they hatched in April. And then that means that she laid eggs in, March. So, what we're learning is that we think the females are breeding as they're going north, and when they get to their breeding grounds, they're already like ready to nest and stuff. So that's I think that's still in the works. But a couple of birder ornithologist friends of mine, we were kind of looking into that, and that kind of what makes sense.
Okay.
So the older males arrive first, and actually those 2 warm days we had last week or the week and a half ago, no, actually it might have been 2 weeks ago now, they came up and I was hearing them calling and displaying, which we can talk about. And so it seems like the after second year males come first, then the after second year females, I believe, then the second year males, then the second year females. So it's kind of neat how it goes. It's not always perfect, but that's kind of what I think we're finding with the data with Lights Out Cleveland. So, it makes sense because, the older birds are going to want to get up to the breeding grounds because they've already bred, or they know that they need to get up there, and the younger ones aren't still at breeding age or have that instinct yet. So that's kind of what we're seeing. And it actually kind of rings true from the birds we're collecting, because a lot of times we'll get the males in first before the females.
Sure. Okay. And just for everybody who's listening, we're recording this in March. It probably won't be distributed until later on, but I just want to let everybody know that, all of us still have at least some snow on the ground. Lovely. Just lovely. Anyway, so, okay. So we kind of have a timeline for when they come back north. And so now the males have their breeding grounds or their territory kind of established. And now what? Now what happens?
So what they're doing as they're moving north, they are doing these display flights. Do you want to talk about display flights now?
Oh, please.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
So again, these birds are amazing. So they do these display flights right at dusk, and the males will do their peep calls. They get meep, kind of peep call.
Oh, do that again.
Meep. and they'll just sit there and go meep, and then they'll actually face in all different directions. I've watched them do this. They'll like face north, then they'll face east, and then they turn around. You can hear them as they're calling, because it'll get louder or quieter depending on how they're turning around. And they have this little, this little spot in the grass so what, to back up a little bit. So the display in open fields adjacent to the habitat they like. So you have an open field that's, kind of edgy with, wet woodlands nearby. Okay. And then they'll hang out in there during the day, and then they'll fly out to these fields right at dusk and start doing their peep calls, or little displays. And then they'll fly straight up into the air and circle and do it like a twitter with their wings. It's like I can't do it with my mouth, but it's like a little twittery sound, and you can watch them kind of circle above you, and they'll make a couple circles, and then they'll zoom back down to the ground to usually the exact same spot they just left, and they start their peep call over again. And so that's they're calling the females. And so the males do that as soon as they get here, and they'll be calling, and then they move more and more north, and they call there. And so that's where I think they're mating with the females that might claim that territory at that spot. So they breed with her, and then they keep going, and they find another girlfriend farther north.
Oh, now it really does make more sense that territory is not a territory for the whole season. That territory, do they call it anything like they do for like upland game birds, like a lick?
Like a lick? Yeah, I don't know. A lick, that's it. Yeah. No, I don't know.
Huh. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But okay, so the males come, they set up their temporary territory, they fly up, they do the paint call and the whistling with their wings, that kind of thing. They get a girlfriend, copulate, and then they move on, and she stays in that territory.
Yeah, potentially. So that's kind of what we're thinking. I mean, the females are still going to move north too, but I think that they're breeding as they're moving north. So I'm not sure how long egg laying takes with the females, but I think from what the data that our ornithologists at the museum had said, we think that that's what they're doing. So absolutely, the males are breeding with whoever they can. I mean, if there's a female there and she could breed, she's ready to breed. I mean, he's going to breed with her, and then keep going north. So it's really I think they're a bird that we don't really know a lot about, I think. And I think with the new research going on with the MODIS tags and these other geolocators and stuff, I think we're going to maybe learn a little bit more about these guys in the future. It's really because, their numbers are declining. And so this is a bird that I think we should look at and figure out what's going on.
Oh, exactly. Exactly. So the females do all of the parental care. That's what I'm assuming, because the males leave. Do they make any kind of nest at all?
Yeah, so the female would just make like a little scrape on the ground. She doesn't make a nest or anything. It's just her four little camouflaged eggs, kind of like what killdeer do. And then she incubates them. And
incubation is about how long?
Probably 28 days, somewhere around there, I would assume. And then what's really cool is I was actually talking to my coworker about this today. They are semi-precocial chicks. So should we talk about the different stages of the altricial, precocial?
Do it. Yes, let's do it.
So altricial birds are birds that are baby birds that are fully dependent on their parent or parents for bringing them food, warmth and protection. And so those are like American robins, northern cardinals, cedar waxwings, things like that. And then you have precocial birds, which are swans, geese, cranes, things like that, where once they hatch and they're dried and they're ready to go, they're ready to feed themselves. They can walk and do everything they need to do, but they need the parents for protection and warmth. Then you have semi-precocial, which is kind of in between both of those, where they're at a nest location or an area, and they can feed themselves, but they need the mother or father to bring them food, and they can eat the food, but then they need the protection and warmth from the mother or father. And so gulls are one of those, pelicans, terns, things like that, herons. So they're able to feed. They just need the parents to bring them food. So woodcock are kind of, I was talking to someone the one day, and I think they need to be in their own little thing because they're semi-precocial, but the mother does bring them food. But then they can kind of feed themselves too when they get a little bit older. So it's really interesting. Their whole life history is amazing.
Wow. And why natural history? I always want to talk about natural history, not only because it's absolutely fascinating, but and people who have listened to any of the episodes I've had previous to this already know that I firmly believe that natural history tells you how to rehabilitate wildlife.
That is a perfect statement. I 100% agree, and that's what I strive in my rehab care, just thought process is what species is it, and what does it do in the wild, and how can we replicate it as best as we can in a captive setting?
Right. And certainly as we go along in this conversation, I think that everyone will get to realize that natural history plays a huge role in success of these amazing animals.
Yeah.
Okay, so the eggs are laid, incubation about 28 days. And are they all hatching about the same time?
Yeah, so they're all going to hatch at the same time. Yeah, so most precocial birds or semi-precocial in this way are going to hatch at the same. So most of the species that are going to be moving are going to be they're going to be laid at the same time. So like gulls will lay one egg, then another egg, and they incubate. And the gulls are different ages.
Right.
But the woodcock they're all going to be the same size because they're going to incubate after the fourth egg is laid. So that means that they're all the same size, just like killdeer, because they wouldn't work with this species. So they are, once the fourth egg is laid, she'll start incubating. And then once they all hatch, they're all kind of ready to go and ready to walk around. And then, the female finds them food and then feeds them, but then eventually they start feeding themselves. It's really interesting.
Okay. So now, they've hatched and they're starting to move around, and mom is doing some feeding. What are the kind of the general developmental stages? I mean, how long do they stay with mom? How do they, and this will reflect directly into rehabilitation, but how big are they when they hatch about? Are they 5 grams, 10 grams?
You know what? I don't remember the gram weight, but they're probably, you're probably about 8 or 10 grams probably. And they're just little cotton balls. They're built shorter, which is neat because it grows eventually as they're growing.
Sure.
They're about that age. And what's really cool is the mother, will find really small worms and invertebrates to feed them because they're too little to eat anything big. But
Sure.
It is amazing how large of a meal they can eat, though. I couldn't believe that our chicks, that we hatched, that we raised last year, I couldn't believe that they were able to eat what they did. It was just baffling to me. It's really incredible, which kind of makes sense naturally, but still, it's wild.
It's like, what? Really?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, I won't put my fingers anywhere near your mouth.
Right. Yeah. So, and then they just, I need to do a little bit more research, but they should be able to fly short distances pretty quickly as they grow, kind of like chickens do, where they're able to get up and get away from predators. And they will walk around with their mother, and she's feeding and stuff. And then what's really cool is she will do a broken wing display like killdeer do.
No, I did not know that.
Yeah, so if you get near a woodcock female, she'll kind of flop her wings around and flop all over the place and make little short flights and flop around and that deters the predators away from her kids. It's really, really cool. Yeah. So they're just such an awesome bird. I think I've said that before. But
that's okay. Keep saying it. Yeah, I'm going to start saying it too.
So
I did.
Yeah. So it's really neat. And then they just, she follows them, or they walk and they follow her. And she probes, and finds little worms for them, and then she'll, bring it up and kind of hold it to them, and then they'll grab it from her beak, and then they'll swallow it, and then she keeps on going. So as they get older, and I'm really bad at the age stages here because we've only raised that one clutch, but they start probing pretty quickly. So I would probably say when they were probably maybe 2 weeks old, they were already probing for their own food. So it's really cool.
Wow. So you mentioned the female will do the broken wing kind of thing to try to defend the babies. But what are their defenses? Do they have defenses against predators?
Yeah. So if we're talking specifically the chicks, they're just their camouflage. I mean, they look just like little pebbles. So, they're really, really cryptic as well. And so they just kind of flatten out and just sit still. And then, most of the time you don't even see them. And same with the mother or father, really. I've watched them, because we rescue them downtown. Even though they're on this concrete, they still do their behavior where they kind of flatten their body down, and they just, they really flatten themselves out to blend in, and it really works. Oh, and then they flush. The mother will flush, and then she'll do the broken wing display, and that distracts the predator away from the chicks. And then she walks over, and then they find each other again after the danger's over.
Wow. And I'm assuming a lot of the normal predators, they are humans can hunt woodcock.
Yep.
I don't know when the season is, but there's a grouse and woodcock society, and they've done a lot with habitat and stuff like that.
Yes.
For them, but they're a hunted species by humans. And then I'm assuming fox, coyote, and raptors, probably things like goshawk and owls and things like that.
Yep. Yeah. Pretty much anything is gonna. Most of those predators are opportunistic. I mean, some of them specialize in certain things, but I know one main predator, peregrine falcons. We find a lot of falcon pieces under the areas where we know falcons will hang out. And there's I'm going to give a shout out to my friend Chris and Chad Saladin. They're peregrine watchers in Cleveland, Ohio. Mm-hmm. And they know more about peregrines than anyone in the whole world. I will bet on money on that. They've been studying peregrines since the early 90s, and that's one of the main food sources they see them carrying this time of year are woodcock. So
the spring. Awesome.
Mm-hmm,
Okay.
Yeah, or fall too, but that's we're seeing that now with the peregrines. They're carrying woodcock or dropping wings and stuff where they're feeding. So they certainly
Okay.
do eat woodcock. But yeah, any predator that is able to, that sees them moving, I'm sure would try to get them.
Okay. That makes sense. I mean,
Yep.
football size meal
Yep.
would be very attractive.
Yeah.
And then the little ones, little snacks, I suppose.
Yep.
I hate to say it, but
No, that's nature. That's what happens. That's
what happens.
yeah.
Definitely what happens. Okay, so that's spring kind of going into early summer. And so do woodcock females, and I think I know the answer to this just from what we described earlier on their migration, but do they have more than one clutch of young or basically one?
It would make sense they could potentially have two clutches. And I'm not sure on that, but I would say that because some of them can breed so early, they could potentially double clutch. But I don't know that for sure. It would just make sense, like certain birds like mallards, they're with their mom so long that they really can't have two clutches.
Right.
Now, it depends on where they're at, where their territory is. If they're more south, it's warmer for longer. So that certainly could be. But from what I know, I would say that it would most on average would be one clutch. But it really depends. I don't know. That's a good question.
Okay. Well, if we find out, we'll put it in the resources.
Yeah, for sure.
We'll find out. So yeah, I wanted to ask that. So then the summer goes along, the chicks are growing up, and then in your neck of the woods, and I think it's probably about the same as in Minnesota, about when do they start really moving on their partial migration south?
Yeah. So what I tell people is with migration, when we really know migration's really here is the woodcock show up in the spring, and then they show up in the fall. So they're kind of the last birds we see as collision monitors, really, because they're cold tolerant, so they can be walking around in snow and they do okay. And so they're one of the first to arrive and one of the last to leave.
Huh.
Yeah, it's really cool.
It is pretty phenomenal. I'm just always amazed at a lot of the birds that can tolerate the winter, whether it's chickadees, which are these little tiny
pinglets and stuff. It's amazing. A little 6-gram bird it's just insane to me.
It's insane. I totally agree with you. Kudos to them for being able to do it. And I'm sure evolutionary wise, it is a benefit to kind of get going on breeding and stuff early.
Absolutely.
Right. Because you want to get your genetic material out there. Sure, not that they're not thinking of it like that, but that's what's
but
happening.
Their genes are.
But their genes are. Exactly. This is a little bit about migration, is that I was doing just a little bit of searching, and there is a Eastern Woodcock Migration Research Cooperative out of Maine that is also, and the website is woodcockmigration.org. And we'll make sure that there's a link so people can kind of look at it. But they've been putting the same type of MODIS and other telemetry types of units on woodcock because also, and they're partnered with a lot of people up and down the East Coast because of wanting to unlock kind of the migration kind of secrets and things like that. So, and I know that, and we're going to talk about this later, but I know that you're also working with another organization with the MODIS and banding and things like that. So we'll definitely talk about that. There's lots to be learned, and rehabilitators certainly play a role in helping in the conservation of this animal because their populations are dropping.
Absolutely.
So I just wanted to kind of give a shout out there that there's a lot of work around this bird. There's in Minnesota too, there's several the University of Minnesota has a research institute that is also doing a lot of work on banding woodcock and kind of trying to learn as much as possible. So, it's of high interest to a lot of people, which is great.
Yeah.
What else about natural history that we haven't touched upon? How long do they live? Do we know?
I don't know. I would say a bird like that, maybe 7 to 12 years on average, I would guess, but I don't know. I know that you can go to the Bird Banding Lab page, and they have a longevity page on there. So maybe we can put that in the links too. And that gives known ages of birds that have been reported to the bird banding lab. And it's really cool to look at all the ages on there. It's really, really neat to look at that. But I would say probably an average, 7 to 12 would be my guess.
Okay. Yeah. And I know we're finding out that a lot of birds live a lot longer than we ever thought they did.
Yeah. Like Wisdom, the Laysan albatross, that's, what is she?
60?
80s?
No, well, no, yeah. I don't know. She's in her 60s. Okay. I don't know if it's like 65 now, 66, and she's still laying eggs.
Yep, still having babies. It's amazing.
Right. And lots of vulture species live a very long time too. And it's just, oh my gosh. Yes.
Yeah.
What Wisdom has seen in her very long life.
That's amazing.
It is amazing to think about. It really is. Yeah. All on the waves of the ocean. Oh my goodness. Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness. Okay. So maybe we will transition that this, we've had this wonderful conversation about natural history, your origin story, about Timberdoodles. Bog stompers. That's what you call it. Bog stompers. Okay, we are going to talk about Timberdoodles, bog stompers, but American woodcock is what we're talking about today. And previously, we've talked about natural history of American woodcock and their migration and what they eat and how they raise their young, all of those kinds of things. But we're going to talk now, and you're going to see it's going to reflect back on natural history a lot. But we're going to talk about how woodcock come into rehabilitation as adults and also as young, and then what can be done for them in rehabilitation and using the natural history to really help increase their chances in rehabilitation so we can get them back out into the wild. So, Tim, I'm going to let you just choose. Would you like to talk about adults? Would you like to talk about young? What should we tackle first? Well,
I think talking about adults would be good because it kind of gives the whole picture of how you set them up for success, and the young kind of play into that a little bit later in their care. So I think whatever you recommend, but I think the adults might be a good way to talk about the whole setup and how the adults do versus the young. I think that would be.
Let's do it. Yeah. Let's do it. Let's talk adults.
Yeah.
So go ahead. Yeah. How do you get them?
So I'll back up a little bit and start. We didn't have success with woodcock for a long time, and I'll describe why. But we used to have one little, very kennel. It was called the woodcock kennel, and it was a little, that you would put catbirds in, or small, young squirrels or whatever, and it had a piece of foam on the top in there because when they flush, they flush up and they hurt themselves again after they're injured, and so. It's a little kennel with a little pan of worms in there, earthworms, and they never did well. And as a rehabber, we should always try to strive to be better at what we're doing, and what we're doing for the animal that animals we're caring for, and try to figure out tricky species. So kind of every year I try to figure out one species that we don't do well with or whatever. And so woodcock was one of them. And so. We always get calls from them downtown every year, every spring. And they would come in and they wouldn't do well and they would pass away or we'd have to euthanize them. And I said, let's figure this out. We got to figure this out. And so I started looking at their natural history. How do they feed? What do they feed on? And I think there's three crucial things that rehabbers probably don't do properly that just changes the game for the success on these guys. Number one is they probe for their food. So their long bill goes down into the mud and to find the worms. So when you have a little dish and you have a long, I don't know what their bill's length is, but it's 4 or 5 inches, and you have a small little, they're not going to be able to feed properly just in a little tray of like we would give robins or whatever. But they're not going to be able to feed properly. And so what I did is I kind of just adjusted what we had going on in the beginning with the kennel, and I actually changed it to a larger enclosure. It doesn't have to be a kennel. We use those wire, cages you see at, cat shelters or whatever, with the wire. You kind of lift up the door and then it slides open.
Oh, so the ones that are pretty much all solid-sided metal,
Yes,
and then the front has the metal mesh door or whatever that you kind of lift up and then can open. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
So we use those. You could use kennels. I've had other rehabbers use different things, but we just use those because that's what we have, and it works well. And so I will put some cinder blocks in the front of the enclosure to keep the dirt in. So we put a few inches of dirt in that enclosure. Then again, going back to natural history.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
We're always trying to keep things super clean and keep the dirt out. You're putting the dirt in.
We are putting the dirt in, yes. And so we have a couple cinder blocks to stop the dirt from falling onto the floor every day and getting the floor dirty. There's probably other ways to do it. We just put little bricks in it and it does the trick. And then I fill the enclosure with a few inches of soil. I don't have it real dry, but I don't have it real moist either. And I'll talk about it in a second. If it's real dry, it gets real dusty and can cause respiratory issues for the birds and for us. And so I make it somewhat moist, but not moist like they would be feeding it. And then I'll have a big dog food bowl empty. And I fill that with night crawlers. I mean, I don't even know how many put in there, probably 50, 60, 70 night crawlers in there. I mean, I pack the bowl with these night crawlers. And that's another thing that I think rehabbers don't do is they don't give them enough food, because we learned that. That's how I learned this, is trial and error. I'm like, well, why aren't they doing well? And then they're skinny, they're not gaining weight. And I learned that they're not eating enough. So I just started hammering them with the worms, give them as many as they wanted, and then more so. And that really changed the game on that. So what I do is I take this big dog food bowl and I dig it to the bottom of the enclosure. So the top of the bowl is actually level with the soil.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. So I have that on the top there, and then I pour all these worms in there, and then I put dirt over top of them, but I make that dirt more moist than the cage.
Okay.
And typically I'll have it in a corner because I like to hide in corners. So I'll have that food bowl in the corner. And then I'll, you'll get a little bowl of dirt and kind of mix it with water to get the right consistency. You don't want it sopping wet. You don't want it dry either. You want it perfect kind of for the worms to be okay, but also more so for the woodcock to be able to probe in there and feed and feel comfortable. And so once I do that, then I'll sprinkle some dried leaves in the enclosure to keep it kind of more natural. Again, going back to natural history, they're always on leaves. There's always dead leaves around where they're at. So I do that. And then the door of the enclosure, we'll put a towel over, a dark towel on the inside of the door, because you don't want them to get their wings caught in the wire of the door if they're trying to escape. So I'll put a towel over that, and I'll binder clip it, to the door so it's covered. Then I'll also put a towel or a sheet, whatever, on top of the enclosure that drapes down in between the door and the enclosure, because as they start feeling better, they're going to flush and try to get out. And then when you open the door, they can escape. And then, when you have a woodcock get out, it's going to re-injure itself easily. Right. So I have that. And so when I kind of crack the door open, I'll hold that towel with my arm so they're not going to get out. And I'll kind of peek in there. And a lot of times, like I said, they like to hide. So they kind of flatten themselves out. And I'll reach a butterfly net in there and net them with the butterfly net. That way they're in the net, their wings are closed, and then you can get them out in the bander's grip and then do what you need to do with them. So those are the three things that really up the success on these birds, is giving them a lot of food. If you think you didn't give them enough, give them more. Keeping the soil where they can actually probe to get the worms. And then also keeping it dark, because they don't need to see to eat, because they probe. So the darker you have them, I think the more comfortable they are. And so,
go ahead. Finish.
Yeah, and so these are most of the collision birds. So this doesn't have to be with the young that you raise, but it really helps with stress. So they like it dark, they like it quiet, and so I think that is really a game changer for this species.
Okay, so a couple questions. One on the darkness, which I'll start there, I guess. Is that so? With the adults, and you're keeping it dark during the daytime, do you just do reverse lighting, or do you just keep it kind of dark all the time?
Yeah, just keep it kind of dark. And, on average, they're in rehab, maybe depending on what the injuries are, a week to 3 weeks. And so a little bit of light keeping them dark, I don't think is going to cause any issues for them. Raising chicks definitely could be, because you need that photo period and the light from the sun. But keeping them dark just really reduces stress. As always, when we're telling people, when you find an injured animal, keep it dark and quiet. We're always trying to educate on that. And this just kind of elaborates on that. And keeping it dark and quiet really helps them reduce their stress. And then when their stress is reduced, they're going to feel comfortable to eat, and then they're going to eat, and they're going to be, the rehabilitation is going to be a success, depending on what's going on.
Okay.
And so that's kind of why we keep them dark. And these things that I do, there may be other ways to do it even better. And I'm always willing to look at other ways to do things, because, it's not about us, it's about the animals. And so, I know you can get into situations where rehabbers don't want to share what they're doing in success. And I find that just so weird, because we're all in it for the same reason. We want to get these animals back out there. And so share with all of your other rehabber friends. And that's what we're doing now. So I'm so glad that you asked me to be a part of this podcast.
Oh, again, still so excited. Oh my gosh, it's getting better and better. If you didn't listen to the first episode of this series, you got to go back and listen to it. You'll be saying that these animals are awesome as many times as Tim and I. So a couple other things about the housing of the adults, which of course will kind of be similar to the youngsters. Yeah. You mentioned earlier that with the Varicennals that you put the bird in, you would put foam on the top of that kennel, because if they flush, then that protects them a little bit. Do you do that the same in this dark setup that you just described?
Absolutely. And we actually use foam that's thicker because it's a larger enclosure to be able to make it thicker, because the foam that was in the kennel wasn't really effective because it was so thin. So where I got this idea from to get a better foam is I was saying, I was talking to one of my volunteers. I'm like, we need to figure this out. What can we put on the top of this to help them not hurt their head again after they're, when they start feeling better. And she's like, well, some couch cushions or something. I'm like, well, where do you get those? And so she actually was throwing away a couch and brought 2 couch cushions in, and I just wedged it up in the top, and it just sat there. And then that was it. It fit perfectly. What I found though is foam is crazy expensive.
It is.
I don't know what people are doing with foam and why it's so expensive, but a 22 by 22 inch foam pad, it was like $70 from the local craft store. I'm like, that is insane. And so we had some gift cards or some, coupons, and it was still a really expensive trip, but it really is a game changer with that too, is having that foam on the top, because they are flushing birds. And that if you don't get them with the net right away, they will flush up and hit the ceiling. And when they hit that foam, it doesn't hurt them. And then they don't cause issues. So,
Wow. Yeah. Such a, expensive maybe, but simple solution. I bet you that you could look on a social media site for free couches.
I thought about that too, but then I worry about the whole bed bug thing, and that kind of freaks me out.
You're right.
So maybe you could freeze it or something first, but that would be a good way to just do foam is couch cushions, but you probably have to be careful.
Okay. I'm rescinding that idea.
It's a good idea, but
unless you could freeze it, I think you're right. If you could freeze it, bed bugs. Yeah, we're not going to go there. Okay. So another question about housing. You have it dark in there. You're trying to keep it quiet. Do you have it in a special room by itself, or them by themselves, or and with adults, do you house more than one adult together? Does that ever happen, or do you only get one at a time? And how does that look? What does that look like?
We definitely don't get one at a time. That's for sure. We on average will have in when the migration's really kicked up and they're moving, we'll have 7, 8, 10 of them at a time. And I try not to house them together, just because you want to make sure you're getting the weight right on the bird and the right medications for the right bird. And they do okay together. I put them together when we get a good amount, and I just have to set them up, because we do other animals as well. And so, these woodcock kind of take up most of our cages. And so, right now we have a bunch of mange squirrels and pox squirrels. I'm like, you guys got to heal up, man. We get these woodcocks around their way.
We got to go, man.
Right. So you can use the kennel things, or we just do those metal cages, but we typically house them separately, just to make sure we're doing just we're getting the right thing for each bird. And then it kind of reduces stress, I would think, too. And then trying to catch one woodcock out of an enclosure is tricky enough. And then add another one to it makes it even worse. So I think keeping one by itself in the setup we have would be ideal.
Okay.
I know other rehabbers use those reptariums and stuff for their woodcock now, and that would be okay too. And you could kind of zip it. And that would be easier to extract them from that without them, escaping and hurting themselves. But we just do one at a time because we're not like New York, where New York gets a lot of them, and so that I couldn't imagine caring for that many woodcock at one time. But yeah, what by themselves is probably the best.
Okay.
Adult.
For adults. Yeah. Because we'll talk about youngsters in a little bit here. So let's talk about general. We're going to talk about why adults come in a minute. And then we can talk about injuries and how you guys assess and stuff. But general management and care of adult woodcock. So when you're catching them with a butterfly net in the space. But like, how often do you handle them? When do you clean? How do you clean? That kind of stuff.
Yeah. So typically in the morning when we have the woodcock in care, we'll catch the bird up with the butterfly net, and then we weigh them with a gram scale that's up to 1/10 of a gram, so you can get the right weight on that. That's what we use for all of our collision birds to get that accurate weight on there, and you can really see if they're gaining or losing. You will. We weigh them in just paper bags, just like paper lunch bags. As we collect them in when we're downtown. So we have these paper lunch bags. So I'll get the bag, tear it on the scale, and then I'll put the bird in there, and I'll binder clip it because they'll flush and they can open the bag. So then I will actually take the bird that's in the bag and place it into a cardboard box and close it. So if it does get out, it's not going to get out and hit the ceiling.
Okay, so secondary containment.
Right.
Bag.
Yeah. That's just how I do it, just to really reduce any issues that could come up. And so then we'll do that, and I try to just care for them once a day. But if they have medication, they have to be medicated twice a day, usually. So we will catch them up twice a day, especially for the first 3 to 4 days, depending on the severity of the injury. And sometimes, giving a medication gets up there at their stomach and they don't want to eat because of that. So you kind of have to look at your bird or just work with your vet on how what you should do for these guys. But typically we'll give them twice a day meds for, 3 to 4 days. And then once they start feeling better, maybe once a day while we're caring for them. And then depending on what the injuries are, go from there.
Okay. All right. Okay. Cleaning.
So they poop a lot. It's really amazing how much they poop. So
it's all those earthworms.
It is. It really, they eat. It's insane. Really, there was a rehabber in New York that reached out to me, Wild Bird Fund, and they reached out to me and said, we heard you do well with woodcock. What are you doing? And so I told them and gave them our protocols, and she messaged me back. She's like, I cannot believe how much they poop. I'm like, I know. They eat that much, they poop that much. That's how it goes. So I'll just spot clean every day and use a rubber glove, a latex glove, and just pick up all you typically go in a corner. I don't think it's meant to be that way, but they just kind of hang out in a corner. And so I'll either just scoop it with a little paint scraper, or I'll just kind of pick it up with gloves and then get all the poop that I can see and throw it away, and then get any dead worms you can see too, because you don't want that bacteria in there and stuff. So I'll take any dead worms out of the enclosure, and then every day once I get the bird out and it's in the weigh box and it's sitting there for a second, and have the volunteers or interns get the meds ready, and then I'll take the food bowl out and I'll dump it into a container. And I dig through it and make sure there's no dead worms in there. I'll add more worms and then make sure the soil is moist, and then I put it back. So that's kind of what I do for each bird is give them their medications. We weigh them to make sure they're gaining weight, and I'll talk about weight in a second. And then then I get them back to I try to make it as quick as I can, just to reduce stress with these guys, because they are a stressy species. So to reduce as much stress you can, do that quickly, and then get them back into the enclosure where they can calm down.
Okay. How long does, in general, and I know you're very fluent with this now, but how long does that generally take? Take them out, I'm going to weigh them, I'm going to clean, I'm going to get new food.
Yeah, 2 minutes, something like that, probably.
So very, very quick, very quick. And that's what you want.
Yep. You want to do it quick and just get them clean and ready and then back into the enclosure as quick as you can, just to reduce the stress.
Okay. Makes sense. So you said you were going to talk about weight.
Yeah. So what on average, these birds are fast flyers, and the number one reason why we get them is window collisions, and second is cats. They slam in that window so hard that most of them don't survive. When we collect them in downtown, 2 out of 3 birds are dead on average. And I think woodcocker are even higher with that. I don't have stats on me to say exactly, the amount of each, but they're such fast flyers. And actually, if you think about it, there's actually 2 collisions when they hit. They hit the window and then they hit the ground because most of it's concrete. So there's actually a pretty good amount of collisions. There's a pretty good amount of injuries that happen with these guys. And, most people, they see a dead bird, it broke its neck. And that's not actually what's happening. Right. They get cranial swelling is what kills the bird. So it's not actually a broken neck, it's cranial swelling. And any collision bird is going to have some degree of cranial swelling. And I think woodcocker more so because of how fast they fly and hit that window. It's really, really sad. So, I don't even know where I was going with this. It starts getting sad.
Well, it's getting sad, but I do have a question about that. We're going to talk about weight in a minute, but okay. But we've kind of gone into why these woodcock come in, and they're flying on migration, having to go through cities. I'm assuming they're flying at night because a lot of birds fly at night for migration. They get confused with the lights. Our silly buildings with all this glass and all these guy wires and everything on top of the buildings, and we go on and on and on and on and on about it.
Yeah.
But they're hitting the buildings. My question is, okay, if they are flying into the building head first, do you have any broken bills?
Yeah,
or any fractured jaws? Okay.
One interesting but sad story is our ornithologist, Dr. Andy Jones, that was at the Cleveland Museum of Natural History. He and his preparators were preparing some dead specimens, and they were wondering. The one bird had a huge hole in her keel. Oh. And he was like, what happened to this? And he's like, what happened? But what probably happened is the bird collided so hard that when its head hit down, it stabbed itself in its chest with its own bill. So that's what the injury was. He said he put the head down and it fit right into that little spot. And so that's exactly what happened. So it is very forceful. So they're migrating at night, and the cities illuminate the sky, and Cleveland is on the lakefront. We're at a great place for birding, but it's also a bad spot for birds too. They're flying at night, and then the city lights, attract the birds that go down to the city. And woodcock are a horrible species to be downtown. I mean, warblers can sometimes do okay, but these guys need that wet, moist, soil, and they need that cryptic environment. And so they're on sidewalks. And so what happens is the birds get down there and they find actually one time I was going to a concert in the fall. This was when I was a kid in the 90s. And I looked up and I saw a bird fly. I'm like, what is that? I'm like looking up, like, what is that bird? I thought at first a green heron, but that was a woodcock, and she was coming down from over the buildings and landed in a potted plant just in the middle of downtown. I'm just like, that is so, intelligent, but also so sad that it had to, land into a little potted plant to be able to be safe. So that's what they'll do is they'll land in these little spots. And then when the hustle and bustle of daybreak happens, when all the people are rushing to get to their jobs, they're kicking up all over the place. And so most collisions happen right at dawn for most of the collision birds, but they're getting spooked up and they're flying from one area to another. And they're such fast flyers that it's just, it's bad news.
It's bad news. Oh my goodness. So they must, in Minnesota, we certainly have a lights out program, and we also have a lot of volunteers that work with a lot of the local Audubon and a couple other birding organizations to walk particular routes, looking for because there's some buildings that we know are just not good, and skyways, because we have a lot of skyways because of all the snow and stuff.
Yep.
And of course they're all glass because you want people to be able to see as they're walking across the street, but they're deadly, and some are worse than others depending on the direction and that kind of thing. And so we are also picking up birds and certainly ones that are alive go into rehabilitation. The ones that are dead go to, after they get identified a catalog, they go to our Natural History Museum, those kinds of things. But the interesting thing is, I don't recall, but I'd have to go back and look at some of the data that in Minnesota, I don't think that, I mean, we certainly get woodcock that comes through the city, but I don't think it's as much as what you were describing to me and what you're describing to me now. So when you get injured adult woodcock into the center, about how many do you get per season?
So when I was looking at the data for 2019, because that was the last normal year we've had in a while, I think Lights Out Cleveland collected 140 that year. Maybe it might have been actually more towards 200. And it's a lot. I mean, it's
a lot.
They're a super collider is one of the terms I've used for these guys. I mean, they collide very often with the windows. And so it's a lot of birds. So on average, Lights Out Cleveland collects about 3,000 birds a year down there. And woodcock are one of the, most numerous species that we get down there. And so it's a lot. So it all really depends on the fallouts. If there's a fallout when the birds are moving, the fallout is when birds are migrating and they hit a low pressure system or rain or fog, they're going to go lower into the atmosphere to fly because they can't see. And that brings them closer to the city. And so it all depends on the fallout and the weather and stuff too. But we do get a bunch of them. I don't remember if spring is more. I want to say spring we get more at one time. And so on average, we'll get in care, we'll have, like I said, maybe 7 to 10 on average in care at one time. During migration peak. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So the injuries you see, if you find, they hit the buildings or hit windows. So that's the first collision. And then they fall. That's the second collision. So we have head trauma going on. So let's say this animal lives.
Yeah.
Okay. It survived both of those, but now it's injured. Somebody picks it up and brings it to you, whether it's Lights Out or another finder or whatever. Yeah. So what are the typical injuries do you see in intake?
Yeah. So the most common injuries are eye injuries and blood pouring from the mouth. That's like the number one thing we see when these birds are admitted. So we always euthanize any woodcock that comes in with the eye that's what's the technical word for it? Ruptured. If the eye's ruptured, we euthanize them right away. Their eyes are set so on the side of their head that they wouldn't do well with just one eye like owls can. I know a lot of rehabbers will release an owl with one eye if they can hunt properly and stuff. A woodcock need to be able to see, their predators and stuff. And if they have only one eye, they're not going to see that whole other side of their body. And I just don't think it's right. So we euthanize those right away. And then, but you see other eye injuries where their eye's all red or it's real watery or it's closed up or it's swollen. And that's one injury. You do see bill injuries. Typically, because of the numerous amount of them that we get in, if their bill is fractured, we euthanize them. They need to be able to use that bill, and you're not going to be able to, heal a fracture on a bill that's pliable. I don't know. We've never been able to do that. Maybe other places if they have a vet on staff, which we don't. Maybe they could do some amazing surgery and stuff, but just you got to think about that species. And if it's a mallard, they can do okay in captivity. You can kind of do more things with them. But woodcock are more specific care. We often see coracoid injuries or shoulder injuries with the bones up in the shoulder. And sometimes we do see leg fractures. And because of the numerous amount of them that we get in, we do euthanize those birds too, just because trying to, pin or stabilize a fractured leg on a woodcock that's already stressed out that, feeds specifically, it just doesn't do well. And so I'd like to hear from other rehabbers if they've had success with that, but
sure.
We just don't, it just doesn't never work. We've tried and it just doesn't work.
And that kind of injury, the leg fractures are generally when they hit the concrete.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So they've already sustained at least one other injury.
Yep.
And now, so a head trauma, which can be significant, maybe a bill fracture. And now you've got a leg fracture. So now you've got 2 to 3 things that are majorly wrong with an
Yep.
animal that is high stress and captivity.
Yep.
That high stress and captivity needs to be taken into account, I believe, and you are doing that.
Yeah.
Because you're taking a look at it holistically, not just, well, I can fix the leg fracture, or we
Right.
can fix the leg fracture, or,
Yep.
oh, we'll give him some meds for the head trauma, he'll be okay. Or, okay, the eye, yeah, it didn't rupture, but it's got to have some major care. And I think of that stress as, it's not an injury, but it's a massive factor in, and we know that if you're stressed, if you or I are stressed and
Yep.
we're not feeling well, it takes us longer to heal.
Oh yeah.
And animals are the same. It takes them longer to heal.
Yep.
So if you have got a stressed animal that you're trying to do all this stuff, may have to take them out of the enclosure more than once a day and medicate and all that kind of stuff. And now we're just increasing and jacking up all those stress hormones all the time. Maybe
Yep.
it levels out at some point in captivity, but they're still going to be above what is kind of considered normal for that species.
Right.
So
Exactly.
I think that triage is important, that you're heavily triaging these animals.
Yeah, it is. And we got to remember that our goal is to release these birds. These aren't animals in
Yep.
like a dog or a cat where you can remove one leg, or you can do all these other crazy, amazing surgeries where they can do okay. This is an animal that is going back in the wild. And so you have to really look at all of those factors in should I try to, fix this woodcock's leg when he's not going to be able to walk, to feed, to eat. And then, it's just thinking about that, just the whole process, like you said, and we get so many that just not a way to easily treat that,
Right. And it's a holistic way of looking at the care and the triage, and looking at the animal welfare, right? Euthanasia, and folks who have listened to several of the podcast episodes, we've talked about euthanasia, not as a whole topic, but within a topic, is that euthanasia is from the Greek, meaning good death. And a lot of times euthanasia is the last gift we can give. We cannot fix everything. We can't. As much as we would like to, we cannot.
Right.
So I think that's just super. It's very wise. There's a lot of wisdom in what you're doing, and it is a gift.
Yeah.
It really is, to end the pain and suffering.
It is. And that's, when the public will bring one in and we say, unfortunately, this bird needs to be euthanized, they want, and I want to be able to release the bird, but
right.
Really, we also want to help the bird. And when the bird comes in, when its bill is fractured and it's got an eye that's ruptured, helping this bird is actually euthanizing it. Euthanizing that bird, helping that bird no longer go through pain and the trauma and the stress of everything. It's just, if we can give that bird that get something, the euthanasia is still, in my mind, a kind thing to do for that poor bird.
100% agree. 100% agree. So let's say we've got this bird in, we've got some eye injury, maybe some head trauma that we might have to be able to treat once a day, no fractured legs. And now it is look like it's resolving. Since you don't have a vet on site and something for an eye injury, do you ever bring your adult woodcocks to have radiographs or to be checked by the vet? And if you do, what does that look like?
Yes, we actually don't. We don't have a vet on staff. We're not able to take all of our animals to the vet, of course. And so we will obviously correspond with our vets and say, hey, this is what's going on. So what I'll do is I'll sometimes take a photo of the injury, like the eye or whatever, and say, hey, what do you think about this? And get get ideas that way. And I'm lucky that I can do that with some of my vets, where I can just text them a photo or an email and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking. What do you think? And then they can, give you their thoughts on how to do that. So it is very stressful. We were talking about trying to, in the future, take birds that have just passed to the vet and have them do radiographs and really see where the injuries are, where the swelling is, just to learn about that. And, because we don't have, nobody really has data on that, I don't think. So we were going to do that, but we haven't done that yet. So no, we just kind of do triage on looking at the birds in hand and looking at the injuries, feeling for fractures and things like that. Just looking at the whole thing like we do in any animal that comes in, right. and going from there.
Okay. And then, so the bird's doing really well, is eating, is either maintaining if it's good weight or gaining some weight. We haven't talked about weight
Right.
yet. So they're doing okay. Now let's talk about release. What does release look like?
So you, in any species, you have to look at time of year, what the species is, and more so the habitat with this bird. It's a very specific habitat. So you're going to want to release them in the same habitat that they need to go into to feel comfortable. You're not going to release a peregrine falcon in the woods. You're not going to do that. That would be insane to do. And woodcock, same thing. You want to release them where they're going to be comfortable. So typically what I'll do is we're lucky in the reservation where we're at in Cleveland. We're in Huntington Reservation in Cleveland Metro Parks. We have there's a lower field towards the lake that's actually perfect habitat for woodcock. So we don't have to take them very far. So what we'll do is, one other thing first too, before I do the release, how do you know when they're releasable? That's one thing we first is, you normally would test fly a red-tailed hawk, or you'll test fly a warbler or a sparrow, to let them see how they fly. But you really can't test fly a woodcock. How are you going to test fly a bird that flies straight up to the ceiling? You really can't, unless you get some involved situation where you have people holding a tarp or something in an enclosure. So what we do is we use our best judgment on how the bird's flushing up. Because when you go to get them out of the enclosure, they're going to flush up. And I just use my instincts and just watching the bird's behavior on how strong it's going up and how fast it's going up, and just watching how even the wings are. And I use that judgment. So I've been right most of the time with that. Sometimes the bird will fly out and won't fly real far. I'm like, I don't like that, but it could be stress. So, you kind of have to, know. So what I'll do is I'll take them to a field that's in the evening too, by the way. We do it in the evening because that's when they're going to be more active. You're not going to release a woodcock during the day because there's more predators out, and that's not when they're comfortable. So we release them in the evening around, right at dusk or right before dusk. And we'll take them to this field and we'll have them in the bag, and we'll just open the bag and let them fly out on their own. We don't do these toss releases where you toss them into the air.
Sure.
They have wings. They can do it when they're comfortable. So, and also they're a cryptic species. They're going to want to hide. So sometimes when you open the bag, they just sit there. They just kind of look around for a minute, making sure there's no predators besides us. Then they take off. But typically they're ready to go and they're out of here. And so I'll do it in open field because if the bird doesn't take off and fly into the bushes that are right there, I can recapture them again and then give them more time in rehab if they need it. Sure. And it's not ideal, but that's kind of what's worked, best for us. But most of the time, probably 99% of the time, they get up and they're over, and out of there. And normally they will fly up and then they'll kind of land right into the thick stuff where they want to be. And that's perfect. So that's an ideal release, is taking them to wet wooded area that has some thickets around that they can land into and feel comfortable in.
Okay. Excellent. And yeah, that judging, flight. I mean, how do you figure it out? I mean, it's hard with like really big bodied birds too. There's a lot of facilities for swans or pelicans.
Yeah. Exactly.
How do you test fly them?
Right.
That's a little hard.
And I think it's easier with the waterfowl because whenever they're in water, they always take a bath and they always flap their wings and move their little tail. It's a thing that the waterfowl do. Yes. And so you can see them open their wings, see that it's even, and say, okay, those wings are even. The flap is strong. This is great. But woodcock, you can't do that really. So, this is kind of the best method we've found, and it seems to work pretty well. And it's just getting that experience on, when they flush fast. And so once they're feeling better and their weight's good, they flush up. I mean, you can really tell they're ready to go.
Wow. I wonder, like in the future here, I'm going to give you more projects, right? Because that's what I'm good about. I got an idea. Trying to figure out a way to quantify what you've been able to develop instinctually because you've seen so many of these birds, right? Whether it's with you videotape it and you're like, well, this is the quality of this kind of flight, this flush that I am seeing that tells me that this animal is ready.
Yeah, that's a good idea. We did actually buy a little GoPro. It's not a GoPro, but it's a little camera that we can, and our goal was with this is to use it with woodcock so we can show how they feed. But because we keep it so dark, you couldn't see in the video. So I got to find one this spring that's a little bit less stressy, because some of them are pretty cool. and calm, and they're not real stressy. So I might find one that's like that,
Okay.
and do a video
Okay.
with that, and then also do a video of us trying to capture them. So that would be show how. That's something I can think about doing. That'd be cool.
Yeah, I mean, if you could catch that, even a couple different, the Raptor Center, and we're talking about, reconditioning raptors, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we've done, the Raptor Center's done a lot of video and slow motion video now.
Okay.
And so it's all been cell phone, and for teaching purposes, it has exploded how we can teach, as far as look at the wings, even, look at the wing, the quality of the flapping and what the tail's doing, what the feet are doing. And now you can really see it with slow motion too.
Yeah.
So it really helps teach people what we're looking for. Cause the same thing. I mean, there are several people at the Raptor Center that have decades and decades of experience. So, just like you, instinctual. Yeah. Hey, I know this bird's ready to go.
Right.
Like, but I'm a newbie.
How do I know, though?
But how do you know? How do you know?
Right.
And of course, we're always trying to pass on good information and things like that. So anyway, do you, and I swear we're going to talk about weights. I swear. But do you band your birds when you release them?
So we are working in a project with the Powder Mill Avian Research Center in Pittsburgh. They actually reached out to us, I think it was in 2018, they saw the amount of birds we were getting in just in collision wise. And they had a study where, and it's a thought process, and I'm sure you guys have heard it there, where a bird hit my window, he flew away though, he's fine. But is it really fine though? Football players, when they slam into another one and then they're all dazed and they stand up, they don't, I don't watch football, but I assume that they don't have that person play again. They get them checked out by a medical professional. And so, you just don't, the thought process is the birds fly away, they're fine, but really we don't think that's the case. And so their ideas was, Luke DeGroot over there at Powder Mill, he said, let's try to quantify this. Let's try to see if they are really fine after collisions. And so he reached out to us and said, hey, do you want to do this project? I'm like, oh, absolutely. Are you kidding me? So, and at that point we were already banning birds, which we are not anymore, unfortunately, but we were. And so that just kind of worked and it worked perfectly. So he sent us a bunch of Modus tags, and we're putting these birds on, these on certain collision birds. The woodcock were one of them. And the good thing about the woodcock tags is that they last longer because the bird's bigger, because the tag's bigger. Because so like in a magnolia warbler, the tag might last 30 or 60 days, but a woodcock, it could last a year or two. So so what we're learning from the woodcocks is they are migrating and coming back and forth with. You can actually see it live on the Modus Network, the website. You can actually see the birds going up with the little track and coming down. And so he reached out to us and said, hey, we're trying to prove that the birds that collide aren't actually doing well after a collision long-term, potentially, because they're tagging healthy birds that, in a mist net, they'll catch them in a mist net and do the same thing, same species, try to do it the same day, and then kind of see the difference in the migration of the birds. And early publications or early data that they were finding is that on average, 80% of the mist net birds, the wild, healthy, didn't hit a window, supposedly birds, 80% of those were being picked up on these Modus towers after release. But then collision birds were only 60% on there.
Interesting.
And one bird in particular is a gray catbird, seemed to not do well after a collision. We had one gray catbird that flew. Instead of going up and around the lake, it went straight east to the coast and then went south in the spring. And that they aren't supposed to do that. So we think that there's something that's causing that from the collision that is causing trauma to the brain, that is altering their instinctual patterns and how they migrate. And so this is a great way to do it with these Modus tags. And so I think we're gonna still tag this spring with any leftover tags that we have, and then Luke and his team are going to dig into that data and really find out what is really happening with these birds. And it's a great way to prove that after collision, that you should not just leave them there and let them fly away. Often rehabbers will say, put them in a box, and then if they fly away in 20 minutes, they're okay.
They're okay. I
You
remember
can't do
that advice. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, don't listen to that advice. They have bill injuries, eye injuries, coracoid injuries, wing injuries, and just because the bird flies doesn't mean it's okay.
Right.
So it's always best to let a professional look at those birds, and that's what rehabbers do. And so let us make that decision.
And yeah, that's definitely best practices that have changed. So best practices, of course, are things that change over time.
Sure.
And to where the majority of the profession are saying, yep, we're going to adopt this new way because it is showing better. And that is one of them, is that I remember growing up in rehab going, yep, leave it in a box for an hour and open up the box outside. If the bird flies away, it's great. If it doesn't, bring it in.
Yep.
And or keep it in the box for another hour and try again. Right. And then if it doesn't fly, bring it in. And now it's like, nope, bring it in.
Yep, bring it right away. Yep.
Bring it in.
Yep. And what I've learned actually is when you tell people to put the bird in a box, make sure there's a lid. For some reason, one day, I'm not even kidding, last spring, I think it was last spring, 3 different people in one day, I didn't specify, put a lid on the box. And they said, oh, the bird flew away. I'm like, well, how did it fly away? They're like, well, it just got out of the box, flew away. I'm like, so I always specify, put it in a box with a lid, air holes, no food or water, and bring it to a rehabber as soon as you can. Yeah. And this is an interesting thing that I learned. There's a couple Facebook songbird and rehab pages, and I had given our Lights Out Cleveland release rates on our collision birds, and in fall of 19, it was 95% release rate on the collision birds, which is insane. We did the math right, and I had one person kind of challenge me on that and say, that doesn't sound right. I don't believe that. I'm like, well, I'm not making it up. I mean, this is true. And I think one of the main things that was different about why our collision rates were better is that, I'm a rehabber and I organized the monitoring program for Lights Out Cleveland. So I taught everybody how to capture the birds, how to reduce stress. And so, when you have a person, that just calls and they had a bird hit their window, it might have hit their window 2 hours ago and they're waiting for it to fly away. Then they finally call, well, that bird's been sitting there for that long without care, or they tried to pet it, as you see online where they're like, oh, I was holding him and he went to sleep and he's calm. No, that's extreme stress and you're going to kill that bird. Right. And so, the reducing the stress is very crucial in all wildlife rehabilitation. And I think that because of the Lights Out initiative specifically are taught to, by most of the time, by rehabbers to capture these birds, reduce stress. Once we collect the bird, they're in a bag that's dark. We take them to the car that's dark. We don't, everything's quiet and reduce stress. And so I think that was one of the reasons why that we have such good success. And so it's just reducing stress and is what it is. And we know that collision birds are going through a lot. And so everything you do to reduce that is you need to do is everything you can.
I wanted to bring up one other thing. I just want to let anybody who's listening, if they're not familiar with MODIS and MODIS tracking, it is where a lot of people are a little bit more familiar with GPS tracking or satellite tracking. So this is similar, except these MODIS trackers are on top of buildings, for example, or towers in certain places, and they're strategically placed. So these birds that fly over have a tracker on them. And then when they get to be within a certain amount of distance of that MODIS tower, it picks it up. Is there anything else with those MODIS? It's a wonderful advance in being able to study migration. But anything else? Am I missing anything with that? Or is that a general explanation?
You pretty much covered it. This little tag, what it's doing is it's got like a little frequency, and it's sending out a frequency every certain amount of whatever, and it's in a certain, I'm not technical like the guys over there in Powder Mill, but it's sending out a frequency, and these towers are looking for that frequency. So when the bird's flying by, they say, oh, there's a frequency, and then there's a code that's specific to that tag, and it'll say, okay, American woodcock number 28 flew over at 12 midnight, October 31st or whatever, and so they can know that. And so then when they download that data, or the data is already uploaded naturally with Wi-Fi or whatever, they can see when that bird's flying by. So it's really, really cool to know. Our tower at the reservation that we're at in Cleveland Metro Parks, We had 2 Kirtland's warblers come past our tower on the same day. It was like 2:00 in the morning. It was like October 12th, I think it was, in 2019 or 18. And so, I mean, that's amazing that one of the most, endangered songbirds in North America is flying right over our tower, and we never even would have known unless they had that. Banding is important, I think, for all birds. You learn so much with that, but then also adding color bands or adding, these satellite transmitters really changes the game on really what these birds are doing. Because most of the time when a bird's banded, it has to be either found or caught somehow to be able to know that band is on that bird.
Right.
So, these little Modus backpacks that they're wearing really change the game on learning where these birds are going.
Oh my gosh. When. Right.
Yeah.
So we can go down that path, but I promised everybody we would talk about weights. So let's talk about weights before I forget again.
Yeah.
Weights for adults, female, male, all that.
Yeah. Stuff. So males are smaller than females. So most birds, the males are bigger, with waterfowl and things like that. But raptors, we know raptors obviously the females are bigger. Hummingbirds, the males are bigger, and woodcock actually are the females larger than the male. So on average, it was funny today. We had our first woodcock from downtown brought in, and it was dead. And I was, weighing it. I was showing my volunteer. I said, "This is a male, and this is why." I said, "I'm going to guess the weight." I said, he's 147.9 grams. Said, okay. I said, "What do you think it is?" And she's like, "Well, I have no idea." I'm like, "Okay." So I put on the scale. It's 147.2. I'm like, it's so close.
I think you're within that. Yeah.
Right. So on average, the males are 150 to 170 probably grams, and females are 170 to like over 200. I think we've had one that was like 240 grams or something. So on average, that's the weight. And males are much smaller than females, and so when you get a woodcock in and you weigh it, you can feel the keel and see how, to kind of get an average of if you think it's a skinny female or a heavy male. But on average, the males are between 150 and 170 and females over 170 usually.
Okay.
And the reason I want to weigh them every day is to make sure they're eating, and don't get stressed out if they don't gain weight right away, because normally they don't. And most species, they're not going to. I mean, you don't put a peregrine in and it's going to eat right. Well, peregrines are different. Other birds might not eat right away, like a red-shouldered hawk. They're going to scream at you the whole time. They're not going to want to eat on their own. So they're going to lose weight. And you can't force feed, in my opinion, woodcock. That's one thing I would never do. It's just so stressful on the bird. I know certain places have said they used to force feed, and they always lost them. They always died. And so we don't force feed them. And so I've actually, I don't know if I sent you I took photos of our intake sheet, because we write the weight on the intake sheet, then it gets put in Wild One later on. But the weight will start off at 150, then it'll go to 149, 147. 140, 130 or something, and then it'll start creeping back up. It'll go from that, and it'll go back up and up and up and up. So sometimes it takes 4 or 5 days for them to start eating, because they're injured, they don't feel well. And so you want to get those meds kicked in, reduce the stress. Then they start eating, and then you get them back up to their normal weight. And most of the time when we release them, they're heavier than when they came in, because they were flying all night long and they lost all that weight. So don't stress about the weight right away, because they're going to lose weight usually. Sometimes you get them eating in right away, but most of the time, because of the bird, like some of our songbirds, like our warblers, a Connecticut warbler come in at 9.9 grams, and you set them up the right way. The next day they're 12.2 grams, and then they're 13 grams, and so it's really, really great. But that's not always the case, especially with the woodcocks, because they are so stressy. So don't stress about the weight right away. They will eventually start gaining weight if you set them up right, and it works really well. So that's kind of how we go with the weight, is we weigh them every day, make sure they're gaining, and then sometimes once they start feeling better and they're not on meds anymore, I'll only take care of them every other day. I'll give them enough worms that I can feed in, that they're going to feed on, and then I don't mess with them, because then they have enough food in there, they have enough space, their water's clean, and I don't stress them. That's ones that are real stressy, because sometimes you get them in And, we didn't talk about injuries, but sometimes you can't treat the injury the first day because you'll kill it. I actually had one last year that my coworker and I were trying to work on. And I said, Laura, this bird is very stressy. I'm worried about doing this wing wrap. It had a core, I think it had I forget what injury it was, but we were doing a body wrap. And sure. I said, this bird is really stressy. So we got to be really, really fast. And before I was able to even get the bird ready for the wrap, the bird died in my hands.
Wow.
And it's just really reducing stress. So sometimes I won't treat the injury, the wing fracture, the first day, because you're going to kill the bird and you're not going to be able to fix it anyway. So I'll do 24 hours to kind of de-stress, let the meds kind of kick in, and then do a wing wrap,
Well, it makes sense. I mean, stress does kill. Yeah. We know this. We know this in rehabilitation, especially if you do cottontail rabbits, this.
Oh yeah.
You know this very much, but with all wildlife, and we're predators, they know it, and they know they're in a compromised position. So it's very, very good advice. And sometimes, you get an animal in, you black box it for a little bit before you even, you barely look in the box to make sure they're not bleeding out.
Absolutely.
Right? Or an emergency, but then you give them a chance to distress. You may have to do a physical exam in 2 or 3 parts, or like you said, Tim, which I think is spot on. Sometimes you have to wait a day.
Yeah.
You just have to.
Yeah.
Because, if the animal dies, well, now you can't rehab it.
Right. Correct. Right. And obviously that's, there's case by case basis, with any animal. I mean, you get a peregrine that's got a radius ulnar fracture, you got to wrap that wing. I mean, things, it's in a cage that's lit up, obviously, because, they're different and they're going to be bouncing around just like peregrines do. And that's a situation where that bird wing has to be wrapped. But woodcock are not bouncing around for the most part if it's dark, and so they're going to be sitting there. They're really, usually when we first get them in, they're just so knocked out, they're just kind of sitting there anyway. And I'll give them the medication and set them on the food bowl and leave them alone for the day. And
sure,
every case is different, but you just got to know your
and your protocol with meds. You mentioned before you work with your veterinarians on that, so you kind of know when you're going to give medications. But are you basically in a situation like you just described? Is it mostly meloxicam we're giving? Okay.
Yep, I know meloxicam. Yeah, it's great. Sometimes I will use prednisone if the bird is really, really bad. Like, obviously steroids are a last ditch effort for most of these animals. So we will use prednisone on a bird that's real bad just to try to see if we can get that swelling down. But most of the time it's meloxicam we're using twice a day.
Okay. Yeah, just thought I would just double check there. And again, it's all, working with your vet on that. So you kind of know the protocols. You don't have to call them every time you get a bird in, or maybe you do. It depends on how you set up your relationship with your veterinarian. But if they've helped you with the protocol, then you know in what situations you're going to be giving it, and then you can report to the veterinarian a little later. So just wanted to kind of clarify that.
Yeah. So there's one thing that I forgot to mention, and they almost always come in with blood in their eye or in their bill, always in the bill. And it actually dries. It'll dry and keep that bill shut. So I will actually, the after the collision, when after the bird's, de-stressed or whatever, I will, to give it meds, you sometimes actually have to take your fingernail and run it along the bill to pop the blood.
Oh,
you can open the bill.
Okay.
And so that's one thing that you kind of, if you can, quickly clean the blood off the bill so it doesn't freeze that bill shut again.
Sure.
And then they do have eye injuries often. And so again, talk to your vet on what meds to use, but typically you don't want to use any meds with steroids if there's a injury to the cornea. If you can see, like, do a gram, a stain. But most of the time I just do just lubricant for the eye, because it's always going to be full of blood and then swollen shut. And so you want to make sure that eye is moist so it doesn't dry up, because it's kind of frozen with all the blood. So you try to clean off as much blood as you can, as quick as you can. And then I use lubricants in there, in the eye, to keep the eye moist.
But it's
So,
a non-medicated lubricant
correct,
until you can
correct.
figure out with the
Exactly.
vet what you should be using. Yeah.
Yep.
And that's
Yep.
important. You don't want to just throw anything in an eye because it depends on what's wrong
Right.
to what medication you need. So
Exactly.
really
Yeah.
good point. Really
Yeah.
good point. All right. Well, I want to talk then about youngsters. And
Yeah.
this was the original reason that I and one of these other centers in Minnesota were really interested in figuring out how to raise young woodcock, and that's how we found you. And we've been putting together this beautiful standard operating procedure that will be part of our resources for everybody.
Yeah. You guys are great.
So yeah, it just when we met you, I remember you said, "Yeah, it's all in my head," and I'm like, "Oh, we're getting it on paper, man. We are getting it on paper and pictures and whatever else we can, so we can." Spread the word about how to help young woodcock. So,
yeah.
And you've been so wonderfully generous with your time for us to do this and to be on the podcast as well.
Of course, yeah, happy to be here.
So let's start from the beginning. When do you usually see young woodcock, and what are the circumstances that you get them?
Yeah, so we don't get them often. I think I can count on one hand probably how many chicks we've had admitted when they're babies, like real fuzzy little babies. Mm-hmm. And I think I would guess the number one reason why you're going to admit chicks is people find them in the woods and don't realize that the mom is actually there, and they take them away, just like cottontails and white-tailed deer or other deer that that are in the United States. It's an abduction with the intent to rescue, and so I think that's probably one of the main reasons. You might get where a cat had killed the mother, and then the chicks are alone. Mm-hmm. So that's probably another reason. So I think the situation that when we got our 3 chicks, it was in 2020 actually, was the mother was killed by a cat, and there were only 3 chicks because the 4th chick was killed by the cat as well before the person can rescue the baby.
Okay. So they arrive at your door, and what's the same? What's a little different about any kind of intake exam?
So just like any young bird that needs to be brooded by its parents or parents, you got to keep them warm. So we actually set them up like we do ducklings. We had a little plastic Tupperware container that's elongated, kind of shaped like a 20-gallon aquarium or so. You can use aquariums too. And we had that where there's a heat lamp on the one end with the ceramic bulbs, the flukers or fluckers, however you say it, ceramic bulbs that we use for our ducklings. And that's on one end, and then the water's on the end of the little water hopper, and then in the middle is where I keep their food. So it doesn't get burnt, warm from the heat lamp, but it's closer to the heat lamp because they're going to want to be next to that heat to stay warm. One thing that's tricky about woodcock chicks is that you have to feed them when you first get them, when they're real little, like when they're between 1 day old and 5 days old, 6 days old. The mother is going to feed them the worms, and then they can eat it from the tip of her bill. So what we did is, and they're going to be skittish, which is good, that you want them to be skittish. And I will just open the enclosure where I can just reach my hand in slowly, and I had a little peanut butter jar lid with smaller earthworms cut up, and actually they were red wrigglers we used first, the smaller worms, and I cut them into pieces so they don't climb out and get away. The bottom of the enclosure was just a towel to keep things nice and clean, and then I had a little bowl, the little cap with the cut worms in there, and I would pick up the worm and slowly hand it over to the chick and touch its bill with it. And that's just a natural, going with natural history, that's what the mother will do. She'll walk over and touch the bill to the chick, and the chick will start naturally nibbling on that worm, and then they start to swallow it. So they're gonna peep when they're hungry. So whenever they're peeping, they're hungry. So you got to feed them. If they're peeping, you got to feed them.
I think that's kind of key, right?
Yeah, it is.
Is that? And I want to ask a clarifying question. When you are reaching in to feed them, are you using a forceps? Are you using tweezers?
Yep.
Forceps.
Yep.
Okay.
Tweezers. Forceps. Yeah, just the small thin ones that can hold the smaller worm. And I just kind of slowly, with my hand, I'm kind of looking the other way because I don't want them to know that I'm looking at them, but I'll kind of look and put it towards their bill, and they might run into a corner for a second. Just be real patient, be real slow and calm, kind of put the worm, dangling a little bit, and it's moist, so the water will touch the bill of the bird, and then that just kind of a natural instinct of swallowing that. And so that's what we did. And then they started eating. And I'm like, oh man, this is going to work. And then as they're eating, when they're peeping, you go to feed them, and I will have this little peanut butter jar lid where I take the worms from, so I start doing that, and I'll pick it up, and then I'll kind of slowly hand it to them. And as they see, they'll start going for the worm much better as they're learning,
Sure.
And they will start to go for the worm, and I'll pull it back away from them and kind of make them come towards me, and I'll make them do it out of the bowl. They'll reach into the bowl, and I kind of teaches them, hey, this is where the food is. Because when they're little, their bill's small, so they're not probing yet. Remember, they're still little, so that their bill's not long to probe yet. So it's really short and cute, and so then they're able to pick up the worm pieces from this lid. And so that's what we started doing. And then we were watching, because we were watched how many worms were in there, and then eventually they were actually eating on their own from this this little cap. And so then once they're eating well from the forceps and from the cap, and they're getting a little bit bigger, so they're probably maybe 10 days old now or so, they're starting to get their feathers, or they got a lot of their feathers already. I'll take a shallow bowl of moist soil, and I'll put the worms in there, but I'll also cut up pieces and put it on top. So then they're going to naturally probe. It's a natural thing for them, they just what they do. They certain species do natural behaviors. They're going to start probing naturally, and so the worm pieces are on top, because you want them to make sure they're eating, because this is one bird, just like hummingbirds. You have to make sure they have enough food, because if you don't have food, they're going to go down and wait real quick. So you have all the cut worms on top, but you have live worms in there. And then once they figure out that there's worms down in there, they're going to start probing, and that's when your cage is going to be full of poop, and then you're going to be pretty happy that they're eating real well. So that's kind of what we did.
Okay. With this Rubbermaid container, I'm going to go back to housing just a little bit.
Yeah.
You had the Rubbermaid container. You've got the heat lamp on one side. You've got the worms kind of close to the heat lamp. You've got a towel on the bottom, one of those waterers, so they can't fall in and drown kind of waterers. Yep. And so what is on the top?
So the top is just a wire lid, but then there's also a towel over that to keep it dark and quiet. The one we have is clear, so we just taped newspaper to the side. And someone asked me, why don't you paint those? I'm like, I don't know. So you guys just paint it, and then you have to put newspaper on every year, like we do. And so, it's real dark. It's real nice and dark, and so the birds aren't seeing you, because one, you don't want them to imprint on you either. You don't want an animal to be used to you, but you also need them to eat from you. So that's kind of in the beginning. You try to reduce as much stress you can on them, so they're going to want to come to you for food, but also you're not trying to get them used to people and getting imprinted.
Right.
And stuff.
Right.
So,
and how often in general, every time they peep, obviously they're hungry, you're going to feed them. But about how often at the very beginning are you going in there? Is it like every hour? Is it every 2 hours?
It's actually probably quicker. That's probably every 20 minutes, 15, 20, 30 minutes probably.
Okay.
Yeah. It's pretty often. It's kind of like most of the songbirds, but it's more so early evening and early morning and late evening is we're going to be more hungry. Just kind of like the nightjars. They're more active early morning, late evening, and so they're going to kind of taper off midday, because that's natural. They're not hungry that time of day. So same thing with the woodcock. They're going to be more hungry in the early morning than later in the evening.
Okay. And then do you, like the adults, you were saying that generally once a day until they're really healed, then it's every other day, you're grabbing out and you're weighing them. Are you weighing these birds frequently?
Because you want to make sure you give them enough food and that they're eating enough, and you're going to clean that enclosure anyway, because it's dirty. I mean, that's something that you want to keep clean. You want to keep their feathers clean, so they're not sitting in their own poop and stuff. So I clean every day. So same thing, try to minimize stress as much as you can. Weigh them with a scale that's going to be 1/10 of a gram, especially with the little guys, because you really want to get that weight down to a science there. And then, keeping them quiet while you get the enclosure clean. Often what I'll do with the same thing we do with our ducklings is we have an enclosure that's already ready. So we just get everything moving and then move them over and then clean that one, later on,
Right.
So that's kind of what we do with that.
Yeah, it saves lots of times and lots of stress.
Yeah.
Do you generally then clean like in the middle of the day because they're not maybe as hungry, or is there a rhyme or reason to that?
We clean in the morning, right in the morning, because it's going to be dirty, especially when they start getting bigger. And so, yeah, we do it in the morning because they're going to be hungry in the morning anyway. So we feed them, we get them out in the morning, clean them, and then we feed them throughout the day. We will spot clean, or I'll just throw another towel over their poop at the end of the day, just so we're not full cleaning again, stressing them out, but we're putting a towel over the poop just for the night so they're not walking around it and stuff. Every situation different and stuff, but that kind of worked well with us, especially early on when they're little.
And then moving to larger spaces.
Yeah. So, being that we only raised this one clutch, because that's the only clutch we really had come in, we raised them in an enclosure inside. And there's really thought process where you want to get them outside if you can, so you can get into the natural habitat of, and natural daylight and stuff. But, how do you do that with a woodcock when they flush like that? Like, what do you do? So we didn't actually do that. We kept them inside and had set them up just like adults. Once they start getting better and they're out of the brooder, we did the same thing and put them in an enclosure with the adults, like the adults are in. And they're less likely to flush when they're babies because they're raised in captivity and they're kind of somewhat comfortable with people, but not imprinted, of course. So we had a similar setup to the adults, but we had them in, we have specialized swim tanks for divers. And we actually just used that. And then there were little, plastic containers that they were in that had the worms in, had some, stuff for them to hide in, a lot of, foliage in there that they could walk under and hide under, hide boxes and stuff. And then, similar to adults, but, reducing the stress as much as you can, only doing it once a day. And then they did well. And then once they were fully, a certain weight, I think when I researched, there's a woman out on the west or east coast that did real well with woodcock chicks. And, she said there's have to be a certain age or certain weight or something, or we waited until they were always fully flighted, because they're growing and stuff. Once they're fully flighted, then we did the same thing. We took them to woodcock habitat and let them go.
Okay. Another question about housing, because I'm always trying to, get that picture in my head. Okay. Do you use anything like we often is used for ducklings, like a feather duster or something like that, since these guys are brooded in the wild, for them to hide under? Or does that seem like it's not as necessary because it's warm and you've got it covered? And
so we did. And then I learned, someone had told me recently that feather dusters are dangerous for them for some reason. I don't know why, but I need to research more into that and why that would be dangerous. I'm not sure, but we did use feather dusters, and you hung it from the top of the lid, and they can kind of go underneath it just like the shorebirds would. So yeah, we did use a feather duster. Okay. And you said, and maybe it's because you're keeping it on the same side with the ceramic heater. I mean, they can get pretty hot. I don't know, but I don't know. We would have to look at that. If we can find out before we post the resources on this, we'll put it in the resources for everybody. But yeah, I wanted to ask about that. And then, okay, so types of food. You mentioned red wigglers. You mentioned earthworms that you cut up. Is there anything else that you feed? So we've tried other things. They don't really like anything else. We've tried waxworms or mealworms, and they didn't eat those. They really like the worms the best. And one thing I forgot to mention is that you want to make sure they're getting enough calcium. And so you can dust the worms with certain vitamins to make sure they're getting those right vitamins. Excellent. And another person suggested, which is a really good idea, getting oyster shell grit and sprinkling it over the top of the soil that they're going to be probing in. So when they're probing, they're actually getting that calcium ingested as well. And that we did, it worked out really good.
Oh, that's excellent. How about bloodworms? Because I know I've used bloodworms for other things. Is that kind of like...
Yeah, so certainly for the younger chicks, when they're real little, that's actually what we tried when I got our first woodcock chick years ago. That it did pass away, and I think it was just too bad a shape by the time we got it. But it was eating bloodworms, so those would work too. Sure, yeah, bloodworms live blackworms. They sell those at local fish stores too, or local pet shops.
Mm-hmm.
So that could be, work out well. And then once they start getting bigger, they can really eat some large pieces. I couldn't believe, I tried the earthworms because they gain more weight with those because they're bigger, so
Mm-hmm.
I cut them up and I could not believe they were swallowing those things out. I'm like, wow, that is impressive that they can eat that big piece of, it's amazing what they can eat when they're, pretty small still. It's pretty.
Sure. Yeah. It's like spaghetti, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yep.
I don't know. Are there particular types of vitamins or calcium? You said, sprinkling a lot of that oyster shell on the top of the soil. So that helps with the calcium. But is there any particular vitamins that you would recommend?
I think we use Lefebvre vitamins, I believe, is what we used to try to get them to at least ingest one or two of the worms with a good amount of the vitamins on it, so they're getting it and stuff. I think that's what we use, Lefebvre. I can look at the back of my notes, but I believe that's what we used.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so are there any, this is not about food, this is about rehabilitation. Are there any in-house management things you have to be aware of? Like, for example, do they get bumblefoot? And maybe this is more of an adult issue rather than a juvenile issue, or any other in-house things that you might see?
So now we thought about that earlier, actually. They could certainly, if you don't have them on soil, and you want to make sure the soil, the soil is clean. So, you don't want to keep the soil in there the whole time. And that's what they've been pooping on the whole time, because it's going to get dirty. And when they're probing it, that could cause, a lot of bacteria. So I will change the soil out frequently, especially for the youngsters. And so, they can certainly get bumblefoot if you don't have them on the right substrate. But I think if you're using soil and it's somewhat moist, that's going to be exactly what they need in the wild. So I don't think you're going to see bumblefoot like you would on a gull or a duck that's, maybe not on the water fully, the whole time. We'll use the daisy mat stuff for that and other matting. But yeah, the woodcock, I think I never noticed it with, because they're on something they would be on in the wild.
Right. Do you have to worry about anything like metabolic bone disease, or angel wing or anything like that?
So I would think that any animal that you're raising, you would want to worry about metabolic bone disease if you're not given the right nutrition. So as long as you're meeting the right nutrition and they're getting enough food, I wouldn't think you'd have any issues. I think if you have a chick that comes in alone, I think that if you have a mirror in there, like we do that with all goslings and goslings, you put a mirror in there so at least they have themselves to look at. Luckily, the clutch that we admitted, there were 3 that came in that clutch, and then 2 survived. 1 did pass away a couple days later, but we did release the other 2, and so they were together. And I don't think they need to be. I mean, it's ideal to have more, but how often are you going to get, woodcock chicks in and another center at the same time? So, we will often work with other centers of, you have a baby fox, we have a fox, you can have, kind of same thing. But I think if you have a mirror in there, that kind of helps them feel comfortable.
Right. You mentioned this earlier, and I'm assuming it's going to be the exact same thing with these juveniles. Is you mentioned, especially with adults, do not tube feed them. And I'm assuming that with the youngsters, it's going to be the same.
I think if you try to tube feed a woodcock chick, you'd kill it. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but unless you're putting them under anesthesia, I don't know how you can do that and not stress the bird out. I mean, they're so little when they're babies. I know some rehabbers, tube feed certain things and have some success. I don't know how you can do that with the woodcock, but maybe that's an option. But I would think that any precocial or semi-precocial animal bird is going to feed if you set them up the right way, assuming the injuries, or whatever. So if they're comfortable, then they should feed.
Right.
I don't think tube feeding them is something I would want to do. No.
Okay. So now these juveniles are growing up, and how do you know they're ready for release?
So you just kind of have to look at their body shape. They're pretty much full grown. They're fully flighted. There's no blood feathers in the primaries or secondaries. They're eating well. Their weight's good. they're skittish of people. That's kind of what I would say is a release criteria for the birds. When they're good size and they're able to fly and they're eating on their own and they're good weight, I would say that they're ready to go.
Ready to go. And like we were talking about with adults, it's incredibly difficult to test fly.
Yeah, you're right.
And figure out if they're ready. So, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I think that if you have them in, you know that their wings are fully grown in. All their feathers are fully grown in. I think that's the time where you can start thinking about getting them out there where they can be in the wild.
Sure. Okay. And again, there were 3 main things that you said that if people did this, that would increase their chances with Timberdoodles. I got that word in again. I can't help it. And so I think it bears repeating.
Yeah. So the 3 main things I think are crucial for success with woodcock are keeping them dark and quiet, giving them a lot of food in the bowl in a way that they can probe to get that food. So you want to have soil in there with a few inches deep, and have the ton of worms under the soil, and make sure the soil is moist, and making sure you're getting the dead worms out of there if any worms die. But really give them a lot of worms. If you think you need to give them, if you think it's too much, give them more. And you'll really see. Another thing we didn't touch on is how do we know they're eating? Obviously besides checking their weights, you're going to see little probe marks in that dog food bowl in the morning. There's going to be little holes all through it that shows that bird's eating. And so besides the amount of poop that you're going to see in there, and that's how you'll know, once they start eating, there's going to be a lot of poop in there. And if they're not, there's no poop, they're not eating yet. There's no probe marks, they're not eating. So that's just kind of one obvious way to know if they're eating. And once they start eating, they're going to probe and there's going to be little holes all through that dog food bowl that's showing that they're probing.
Okay. Oh, excellent clue. Love that.
So using the soil, making sure it's deep so they can probe, because that's how their bill is shaped. And then keeping it dark and quiet, and give them a lot of food. I really think that, and the foam on the top, I guess you can have 4 things. But the 3 main things are, I don't think people give them enough food, because when we used to do this, we would go to the bait store and buy 3-4 dozen worms. And we were wondering why they weren't doing well. It's because they weren't eating enough. I mean, a ton of worms, and I don't know how many they can eat in the wild in a day, but I would say they probably eat their body weight or somewhere around that in worms a day. It has to be. They eat a ton of worms. It's amazing how many they eat.
Sure. So if you're even having that thought, do I have enough? You don't. Then right away, no, you don't, and double it or whatever. Yeah.
And one thing that I actually lucked out on is we would go to the bait store and get these worms, every day. It just was insane. We were buying out the place, and I said, "Look, man, where do you get your worms from? Is there a way that we can get them from a wholesaler?" So he gave us their wholesaler, and so luckily in our area, we get it from bait distributors, and so we actually have a company that will drive out once a week and bring us flats of worms. And so they used to be much cheaper. Everything's going up in price, as you know. Of course, yeah. But they were 500 to 700 night crawlers is about $50 a flat, and on average we try to keep at least 4 flats in the fridge this time of year, because they really go through a lot of worms. And so when you have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 woodcocks in care, you got to have a lot of worms too. So reaching out to the distributors is a great way to reduce costs and get as much, much for your buck on the amount of worms you're going to need. Right.
And don't be afraid to ask for a discount.
Right. Correct. Yes.
Yeah. Because a lot of people really do want to help, believe it or not. And if they can give you a little bit of a break on the worms, then let them.
Yep.
Let them help. Let them help that way.
Absolutely.
Any last thoughts about what was it? You called
them?
Stompers. Bog stompers. Oh my gosh. Bog stompers or Timberdoodles. I got to say it again. Or the American woodcock.
Yeah, I don't think so. I just think that, reducing stress is really the main keys, and the food, and just trying to imitate what they have in the wild as best as we can is really the key for this species, I think. And I think showing it was 2019, we released more woodcock than American robins that year.
Wow.
We get
that's amazing.
Yeah. So that's really huge. So, we were doing something right with that species. So
definitely doing something right, a lot right.
Yeah.
And I cannot thank you enough. This has been a fascinating conversation. And Tim, thank you very, very much for all you do for wildlife in general, but for Timberdoodles in specifics, and spreading the good word to everyone that might be listening.
No problem. I'm happy to share, and I'm not perfect, and, there'll be other places that do better than me and have better ideas. And that's why we should work together and do these podcasts. I've had so many people reach out to me about the success, that we've had with these guys. I mean, people in Iowa, Michigan, Canada, DC, Pennsylvania, New York. It's been amazing. And Virginia, West Virginia. It's just, it's awesome. And so, I had one woman I think it was in Iowa. She had a woodcock that she was going to release at 90 grams. I'm like, whoa, don't do that. That bird's not that's not a good idea. You need to get that bird's weight up. And so I told her our protocols, and she actually kept it all winter because it had flight feather issues. And she released it at 140 some grams in the spring. So just really proud to be able to share, this success with these guys, so other people have success, because that's what we're in it for,
Right. We're in it for success. This is a species too that is on the decline, and wildlife rehabilitation is all about getting these animals back out. And this particular species will definitely help with conservation of the species.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. So we will have a fair amount of resources on the website for this series of podcasts. So please look there on our website, which is just theraptorcenter.org, and then look for Partners for Wildlife, and you'll find it. And you'll find the resource page there. Again, Tim, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Great conversation. And for everyone else, we'll be back again soon. Thanks so much. I hope you enjoyed this episode on Timberdoodles, or what I will definitely be calling them from now on, bog stompers. I learned so much about the American woodcock in this conversation. Look to our website and the resources section for the standard operating procedure for caring for adults but also young American woodcock. In the next episode, we'll switch subjects and we'll be talking about food for wildlife and foraging for food for wildlife in our care. Hope you can join us. This was another episode of Wildlife Rehabilitation from Rescue to Release. We're glad you joined us today. Wildlife Rehabilitation from Rescue to Release is a production of Partners for Wildlife, working hand in hand with wildlife rehabilitators and veterinarians to improve the welfare of orphaned, ill, and injured wildlife. Our executive producer is me, Gail Buell. I'm the Partnership Coordinator for Partners for Wildlife at the University of Minnesota, College of Veterinary Medicine's Raptor Center. To learn more about the Raptor Center and Partners for Wildlife, visit Raptor at umn.edu. Our producer is Kurt Clockey. Are you interested in becoming a licensed wildlife rehabilitator? Visit the National Wildlife Rehabilitators Association website at nwrawildlife.org for resources to get started. And remember, if you do find an injured or orphaned animal, please contact a licensed wildlife rehabilitator in your area. And that's our show. Hope you'll join us next time.